Hello, Professor, fellow classmates. My name is Jerry Schramm, and my capstone research paper and presentation is on the reduction of accidental firearm deaths in children. So I took on the topic of children dying through unintentional accidental discharge of firearms in the home. My thesis was the accidental death of children by unsecured firearms can be reduced through increased gun safety education and legally mandated gun locks. I took on the challenge to suggest that if these firearms in the home were secure and there was appropriate education provided to children and adults on safe storage methods, no child would die through the accidental discharge of a firearm. So with all the guns in the home, the accidental discharge of a firearm really should not take place if proper storage methods are taken by parents and education provided by to both parents and children. A little bit of background on the issue. It's been estimated that approximately 110 unintentional firearm deaths of children occur annually. While that statistic may not shock individuals in comparison to some of the other deaths that we see in the world and the statistics and such that we see in our country, it certainly is a preventable number and devastating when you think of the loss of a child. An increased amount of firearms have been produced compared to a decade ago. From the statistics that I researched, there's approximately 5 million handguns that were produced in 2013 compared to a decade ago. Most of that you would imagine would be due to the prevalence of mass shootings. Unfortunately, a number of mass shootings have taken place over the last decade, school shootings, shootings in public locations, and this has increased the public's awareness of firearms and potentially more people wanting to have firearms on their person and in their home to protect themselves and their family. The increased number of available guns, coupled with numerous gun owners who very well may or may not have appropriate education, it increases the possibility of children have access to a firearm. And parents are 14 times more likely to store a handgun unlocked and loaded. It's very, very challenging when you consider that 34% of homes have firearms, and this is estimated to be homes with 22 million children across the country that would have access to a firearm. And it's I guess it's good and bad that there's only 110 accidental deaths in children when you consider 22 million children are exposed to firearms and have access to in the home. Common misconceptions. Many parents have common misconceptions that children will not touch a gun without permission. That's false. Children can determine the difference between a toy gun and a real gun. Again, proven to be false. An observational study was conducted where researchers placed children into a room, had a handgun, and just watched to see how they reacted when they encountered a handgun. And 67% of the time, the children handled the weapon and touched the area around the trigger. They pointed it at themselves 21% of the time, at an object in the room 33% of the time. And when an individual walked into the classroom, they pointed the weapon at the individual 13% of the time. So common misconceptions that children can differentiate. They won't touch a weapon. They understand a toy between a real gun. These children are touching these weapons. They will handle, they will touch the trigger, and they potentially will engage and shoot themselves or others. Some discussion. Aside from the tragedy of 110 children dying annually from accidental discharge of firearms, 3 times that number suffer non-fatal injuries. And there's 25% of those individuals who have lasting disabilities because of those non-fatal shootings. 90% of the shootings are due to an easily accessible firearm. So those firearms in the home, the injuries that are happening, it's because kids are getting their hands on these weapons. One study conducted in Texas reported that 51% of the handguns were stored unlocked, 31% were loaded, and an additional 13% were both unlocked and loaded. So when you consider that 90% of these shootings are an easily accessible firearm, and you look at these statistics and you say that there's unlocked and loaded weapons, it begs the question, why? Trigger locks and loading indicators have been proven statistically to prevent deaths. Why aren't we using them? Accidental firearm deaths. The children in the home who come across the firearm, they can and will handle that firearm. One child under the age of 14 dies every 3 days as a result of an unintentional firearm incident. Staggering numbers when you consider the loss of life in children. Approximately 90% of 8 to 12-year-olds who found the firearm, they handled it, they engaged the trigger, and they had admitted to being educated on safe firearm practices. These are individuals who knew better, but still the curiosity, the naive nature, just the nature of children themselves. They're going to touch the weapon and they're going to play with the weapon. Parents are naive to the reality. Gun safety education is certainly beneficial to children. They understand it, they practice it, they're aware of it, but properly securing your weapon is integral to preventing accidental firearm deaths. Certainly something that we see in that previous statistic that approximately 90% of 8 to 12-year-olds handled and engaged the trigger despite having that education. During my research, tragic and unnecessary loss of life, there were countless examples of just tragic situations that didn't need to be. Here are two examples of children who were no longer with us because they accidentally discharged a firearm that was unlocked and available. Two other examples: a 3-year-old boy named Holton. He found a .38 pistol in his father's backpack. Holton went into that backpack. He retrieved that weapon, pulled the trigger, shooting and killing himself. 911 recordings after they recount a desperate father pleading for his son to hang on until the ambulance could arrive. And I'm sure we can all appreciate those the emotion in that phone call. 2-year-old Cayenne, after returning returned home with his mother, heard her cell phone ringing in a purse that she had left on the kitchen counter. She had left the kitchen. Cayenne, mom thinking the purse was secure on the counter, Cayenne pushes a chair to the counter, reaches in mom's purse to retrieve her cell phone, and instead finds her .38 Bersa pistol. Cayenne shot and killed himself. Just devastating statistics. Gun safety education in children. Eddie the Eagle, it's a passive learning program that's been in place since 1998, sponsored by the National Rifle Association, the NRA. It provides the basic skills for children. The skills are in that picture: stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. But researchers found that those passive skills, while the children remember those, they don't put them in practice without an active learning component to this education. Children being able to go into scenarios, be able to from that previous mentioned observational study, have a weapon there. What do they do? How do they react? Teaching them and interacting when they do the wrong thing to teach them the right thing. Only with that active component in those scenario basis does the education have a benefit. It's useful for children ages 4 to 7. The older children generally don't respond as well to it, but it's most effective in those children ages 6 to 7. When assessing how well the education is provided to the children, only 18.6% of the surveyed educators believe it should be offered before first grade, and that would be in line with the 6 to 7-year-olds being the most ideal audience. A majority believe law enforcement, military personnel are likely the best educators, most best received by children. And most parents agree with gun safety education in children, but 68% of them 61% of them believe that the education should not have children handling the weapons, and nearly half of those surveyed believed it should not be offered in schools. Some gun safety education for the parents. 91% of parents initiate gun safety education at home. They have discussions with their children, which is fantastic. Education should include collaboration between parents and their children. It's been determined through researchers that children generally understand best how to teach themselves or their friends and colleagues and classmates on how to avoid discharging a weapon or touching a weapon, or some of those best practices. They see children understand best what to do, so parents should include children in those discussions. Focus groups, friends, relatives, they can provide great peer education. They can exchange experiences, insight, ideas. That's also great for parents to understand best practice and what they should and shouldn't do. And 39% of accidental firearm deaths of children ages 11 to 14 occur at the home of a friend. This should prompt parents to ask questions, talk with the parents before your child visits the home of a friend, just to make sure that they're also practicing those same safe storage practices of firearms that you would as well. Gun safety education, healthcare professionals. So the Academy of Pediatricians suggests that physicians should be engaging patients and family members on gun safety, but it generally only happens about 8% of the time. There's a lot of programs that are available to help physicians as well as other healthcare professionals to understand how to engage family members and patients in those conversations and discuss that safety. Nurses and other allied professionals should also take opportunities to engage patients, talk about gun safety, and really highlight the issue of safe gun storage. Gun safety campaigns, PSAs, they're really an in-your-face design to utilize the media and other outlets to try and highlight the issue at hand. The End Family Fire is a partnership with the Brady Campaign and the American Ad Council. It's intended to use media outlets, websites, short videos. That picture there is just a little picture from a video that's available on their website. It goes through and shows situations where children are encountering these weapons, just to show people, parents, adults, how they should store their weapons and some of the issues that happen when they don't. There was another one, a Michigan radio station conducted a successful study. They used a PSA that took place over the course of about 3 to 4 weeks, where they sent out mailers and they did some radio announcements to try and push gun safety education, and then did some research to determine how well it was received. 12% of those who received the mailers learned something new, were able to recount some of that information about gun safety, and 35% of those who heard the announcements on the radio were able to recount at least 1 to 2 gun safety tips that they had heard through the announcements. Gun safety campaigns, the gun lock distribution. So there's different, it's a little different from PSAs. The Love Our Kids, Lock Your Guns campaign was one in which they distributed gun locks for free. They also provided counseling on safe storage practices. The Goods for Gun campaign, they didn't distribute gun locks, but they had something where if you turned in a weapon, you were able to get merchandise, gift cards, those particular things, to try and encourage weapons that were sitting in the house. Try to encourage people to get those off the street, away from the children, and they would provide them something for those. While this wasn't a safe storage, it certainly got the guns away from the children, but the big component was to bring awareness to the community about guns, about safe storage, about keeping them out of the hands of kids. So these were certainly different types of campaigns that focused on gun safety. I thought this was an interesting photo just to show the impact of gun locks. Impact of gun locks are children who are alive in happy families. So this really, I thought it really captured what I'm trying to accomplish. Statistics support gun lock use. This is really an interesting one. The U.S. General Accounting Office confirmed that every single unintentional shooting in which a child under the age of 6 killed themselves or another could have been prevented by a child-proof safety device. I just want to highlight every single unintentional shooting. It just speaks volumes. You know, again, it says, why not? Research conducted in Texas reached the same conclusions, and 98% of Americans support the use of gun locks and safe storage of firearms. But surveys show that nearly half of them don't secure their firearms. It's amazing. According to one survey, only 39% had firearms secured, unloaded, and ammunition stored separately. 24% of gun owners surveyed reported using trigger locks. 59% would be willing to purchase a child-proof gun. And it just brings me back to when 98% want to see better safe storage practices, and they support it, why are these statistics so low? Different types of gun locks. So again, gun locks should be expanded to include not just a physical locking device, which very well may be the first thought, but gun locks in the larger sense, that a way to secure that weapon. So lock boxes and gun safes are an option. They can be accessed with keys, combinations, or even currently fingerprint readers. You put your fingerprint on there, it can recognize it and unlock the weapon. They vary in price depending on features and size, and some lock boxes can even be mounted in locations like a bed frame or someplace convenient if needed for self-defense. Cable locks are another useful device. From what I can tell, the cable goes through the chamber in the barrel, has a lock on there, and it prevents a bullet from entering the chamber. These are relatively inexpensive from what I've seen. You can get them for under $20. They're typically removed with a key or a combination. Trigger lock seems to be the most common. So it's two pieces that fit together and keep the trigger from being engaged. Usually removed by a key, a combination lock, or currently fingerprints are an option as well. Again, they're going to vary in price depending on what features you're looking for. One of the newest safety mechanisms are smart guns. Prevent them from being fired by unauthorized users. They use a biometric fingerprint reader or some sort of an RFID, a radio frequency identification device. If you notice in the photo, the gentleman is wearing a large watch. That watch communicates with the weapon, and when the watch comes in close contact with the weapon is unlocked and it's able to be fired. The federal position on gun locks: President Obama signed an executive order requiring safe storage be offered in all handgun sales, but he didn't mandate that they be used. In 2013, with the photo you see there, Obama signs an executive order tasking Consumer Product Safety Commission to evaluate gun locks and update standards depending on what they found. From what I can determine from my research, federal law has not changed, and gun locks are still not mandated. State position on gun locks: several states have laws requiring the inclusion of gun locks with all handgun purchase. From what I can tell, in 2017 that was 11 states. Massachusetts is the only state that mandates firearms to be stored with a locking device. New York City and San Francisco have similar ordinances requiring locking devices. This has been challenged in the courts, but the state courts have upheld that required use of gun locks is constitutional and appropriate. Child access prevention laws, or CAP laws, they hold gun owners criminally liable if a child accesses an unsecured weapon and injures themselves or others. A number of states currently have these practices and have criminal penalties for those who violate. Studies have shown CAP laws have a 17% decline in the number of accidental firearm deaths. And Florida is an outlier. They had a 51% reduction in mortality rates, and it was reasoned that it's due to felony conviction for anyone found to have violated the CAP laws. But one thing to keep in mind is CAP laws did not mandate the use of gun locks, only penalize those who have a child who accesses and injures themselves or another. So if it should be determined that you have an unsecured weapon, that's not against the law. It's only against the law when that unsecured weapon is accessed and utilized by a child. So certainly a step in the right direction, but not where it needs to be. The counter-argument. There's one argument by gun advocates saying children cannot fire a gun. Young children, they don't have the ability of squeezing the trigger. So research confirms that 25% of 3 to 4 year olds, 75% of 5 to 6 year olds, and 90% of 7 to 8 year olds have a trigger pull strength of at least 10 pounds. Ironically, it only takes 5 pounds of pull strength to squeeze the trigger on 40 out of 64 commercially available handguns. So this certainly is refuted as an argument. Accidental firearm deaths are an outlier. There's a challenge that 110 deaths per year are just accidental issues and not necessarily strong enough to support a globalized mandate. It's kind of a plausible argument. 110 deaths is kind of a low number in comparison when you look at deaths by vehicle accident, fire, poisoning, falls, drowning. These are all examples of higher death statistics in children compared to accidental death by firearm. An additional consideration is that an estimated between 3 to 5 non-fatal injuries occur for each fatal accidental firearm death. These are occurring a little bit more frequently than just 110 times. Although it doesn't cause death, it's certainly injury as well. But a morally based defense to this argument is a realization that studies show that death could be prevented by the use of a child-proof safety device. So then the question becomes, regardless if it's 110 or 20,000 deaths, if it can be prevented and a child cannot be killed or injured, why not? Second Amendment rights, probably the biggest challenge that gun advocates hang their hat on to mandated gun locks. They argue that, as you see there in the Bill of Rights, Article 2, that the Constitution guarantees the ability to bear arms, protect themselves, protect their property. Gun advocates, they used the Supreme Court decision from Heller versus District of Columbia, in which the Supreme Court overturned a handgun ban that had existed in Washington, D.C. And the Supreme Court ruled statutes that prohibit firearms and require them to be inoperable in the home for immediate self-defense violates the Second Amendment. So that's kind of what the gun advocates use as their staple to say this means you should not be able to mandate gun locks. However, that's been successfully challenged in the court systems in Massachusetts, New York City, and San Francisco. The courts determined it did not violate Second Amendment rights to require securing firearms. The inconsequential time delay in accessing a firearm in the event of needing it for self-defense could be as much as a few seconds, and they said that is really just inconsequential compared with the ability to prevent injury or death. Another interesting argument against the Second Amendment contestment by the gun advocates is that statistics show there's a higher probability of accidental firearm instances in the home than there is for self-defense. So basically, somebody's going to get hurt in the home that is not an intruder compared with that of an intruder. So studies show a gun in the home is 43 times more likely to kill a family member or friend than for self-defense. It's also been shown that family and friends were the shooter majority of accidental shootings. 90% is the majority they speak of. So in most cases, you're not going to shoot an intruder. You're going to shoot somebody you don't intend to, or a child's going to shoot themselves. So although gun advocates argue that weapons must be available for self-defense, the statistics just don't support the need to have these weapons readily available. The statistics show that somebody who's not intended to be shot is going to be shot by these weapons, and again further supports the need for mandated gun locks. One other small subtle argument would be that the gun advocates continue to challenge for Second Amendment rights, saying that they should have the ability to bear arms. However, also in the Constitution suggests that every citizen has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, including children. So research proves the effectiveness of gun locks in preventing accidental death in children. So this would go ahead and suggest that gun owners who violate, that push back and suggest that mandated gun locks are not appropriate, are they creating an environment where a child is having their life threatened? Their life threatened in that they, again, are very naive, they're very curious, and they will have handle that weapon. They didn't ask for that weapon to be placed there. They don't understand the weapon, but they certainly can kill themselves on it. So there is certainly a challenge there. Subtle as it may be, it's still something that can be contested. Ethics and values. So although there's abundance of research supporting the use of gun locks as a means to reduce accidental firearm death in children, it's an ethical dilemma as much as it is a logical argument. Parents are always going to protect their children. It's inherent. As a parent, I would do anything to keep my children safe. And use safety devices to minimize the risk of injury or death. Car seats and bicycle helmets are prime examples. You place a child in a car seat, you're using a car seat that's going to be appropriately rated and is going to be the safest on the market, and you're going to make sure that that child is buckled. But what is the chance that every time you pull out of that driveway, you're going to get involved in a vehicle accident? It's very low statistically. Could it happen? Yes. But you're going to take every opportunity to prevent injury and death for that child by placing them in that car seat. Just the same as a bicycle helmet. You're always going to require that bicycle helmet. So if we're willing to make these preventative measures happen on a regular basis to keep our children safe, why not gun locks? Despite the sound reasoning parents should use gun locks, it's also plausible that they're protecting your children by having that firearm readily available in case of an intruder. They face an ethical dilemma. What's the best decision? Well, it has to be the best decision for them because that's ethics. And ethics are different for everyone. There's no right or wrong answer, it's only the best answer. So use of the ethical decision-making process certainly allows a thorough review of the facts, compare the risk and the consequences, and ultimately reach that decision that incorporates personal morals, values, and finds the most right answer for that particular person. But those parents who do support mandatory gun locks and demonstrate an education, they demonstrate responsibility, courage, putting others' needs ahead of their own. They're certainly leaders and willing to go against the grain. Society accepts responsibility for protecting and caring for the children. There's countless times as a paramedic where I watched an adult who had no relation to the children, the child run over and help an injured or a sick child, just because that's the inherent nature. That's kind of our culture. Mandating the use of gun locks will ensure that firearm accidents do not prematurely take the lives of our children. They work, they save children. In conclusion, statistics show there's an unacceptable loss of life due to accidental discharge of firearms. Research proves child safety devices, they work, they prevent injury and death. The use of gun locks and safety education will prevent children from handling or accidentally discharging a firearm. The statistics overwhelmingly support it. Cities and states have enacted mandated gun locks or cap laws. They're certainly the trendsetters. They are the leaders. They should be looked upon by other states and cities to enact similar changes, and they'll see the same drop in mortality rates that these states have seen. Accidental death of children by unsecured firearms can be prevented. Governments must follow the lead of other cities and states. Ethically and morally, it's the right thing to do. No parent should ever lose a child to a totally preventable, unintentional firearm incident. Thank you for reviewing my presentation. I hope you were able to gain a lot of information. I put a lot of effort and time into it, a lot of research. There's a list of all of my references. I did not put where to retrieve those, but happy to provide if you had interest in looking further. Thank you again. I hope you enjoyed.